This episode is sponsored by Fastly, the application security leader and edge cloud platform behind many top digital experiences. Fastly helps organizations deliver and secure online experiences for their end users through a modern, developer-friendly approach to security. With their next-gen WAF, bot management, and DDoS protections, teams have the tools they need to ensure their applications and APIs perform at their best without sacrificing speed or reliability. Discover how Fastly transforms security into an enabler for digital innovation at securityweekly.com/Fastly. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Instead of a second interview this week, we have a topic segment. It's an idea we're playing around with where we can go deep into a topic that isn't necessarily something we cover on the news, or maybe we covered on the news and it would just dominate the entire news segment, which has happened before. Or in this week's case, it's something that could, this is a report, the Verizon DBIR comes out once a year, every year. And I don't know about you guys, but the moment it comes out, everything else is forgotten and I dive into it and everything else has to wait. It takes priority.
Yeah, I feel like as an analyst, a decent chunk of what I get paid to do is read this whole thing and then give my customers the TLDR. So yeah, that's basically when one of these drops, you're like, all right, well, I guess I'll talk to my family in a day.
Yeah. It is a challenging size. It is, I want to say 117 pages. It's well over 100 pages.
117 pages. Yeah. It's
117. Okay.
And it's
you can
dense, the way they talk about it and stuff like that. There's not a lot of fluff done in here.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite use cases for my Remarkable is just no distractions. I send this PDF over to my digital e-paper tablet, my Remarkable, and just dive into this thing with a pen and scribble all over it and mark stuff that's interesting, underline stuff, put stars by things. And I'm on page 40 something. That's as far as I made it. Did a podcast earlier this week with Alex Pinto and Alexandre Sierra, who are good friends. Alex Pinto is the lead author of this thing and has been running the DBIR for a number of years now. I forget how many years, but yeah, it's a really interesting one. I feel like it just keeps getting better and better. This is the 18th edition. The sample size is amazing. So there's not a whole lot of breach data out there. Oh, and I should mention, I changed into my data gear here. I don't even remember what my t-shirt says. Could one of you help me out? I can't read it.
That was wasn't very data driven of you.
That's right. And then talk data to me is on the hat. But
yeah, that's a little small for me to read.
Yeah. It says talk data to me. It's actually not even from a cybersecurity company. I picked this up at a supercomputing conference, the supercomputing conference.
It's very Sabio of you.
So speaking of data, the this data set that they analyzed for this year, this is all 2024 data, over 22,000 incidents and over 12,000 breaches. And breaches they're very specific about how they use these terms. So like a DDoS attack would be an incident. And if data was stolen or compromised in some way, that would be a breach. So all breaches are incidents, but only some incidents are breaches by how they define it. If there's no confidentiality impact, then not a breach. Yeah, and the way that they get that, I forget how many sources they have, but law enforcement worldwide, it's very notable. Like a lot of the reports that we see come out tend to be very U.S. centric or just U.S. and Europe, somewhat limited. Whereas they've got law enforcement from all over the world, a lot of different pen testing firms, security firms, vendors helping them out with the data that they analyze for this report every year.
It's about 2 pages of companies listed out.
2 pages.
And organizations. Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot.
And there's some great Easter eggs in this report. It might be tempting to feed it into ChatGPT and ask for a summary, but you would miss some really, really great stuff. It's they try really hard to make the report a joy to read, even if it is that long. The footnotes, don't skip the footnotes. They are also very funny. When Alex Pinto introduced himself on that other podcast that I did, he introduced himself as a footnote enthusiast. So, yeah, they put a lot of work into it. And what else was I going to mention here before we dive into it? Yeah, so another thing I wanted to mention about this report is, like we were talking earlier about BYOD, we don't exactly know what the benefit of BYOD is to businesses. Like, we know it's a hot mess from a cybersecurity perspective, but obviously companies are getting benefits out of this. You know, there's capital expense they don't have to spend on laptops and smartphones. There's, gets employees up and running more quickly. There's less waiting there. It's more convenient for the employees. So maybe the employees are more productive. So it's just something you have to keep in mind with some of the stuff that, there's some unsolved problems here. There's some messes here. But these shortcuts, these things that are maybe not as secure as they could be, businesses are making money off of this. They're getting some benefit out of this. And without knowing exactly how much that is, it's hard to be kind of judgy and say, MFA on all the things, right? 100% of the time, no excuse. It's just really hard to know how hard we need to push for some of these things.
Yeah, it's I think there always in security is a conflict between potential cost of risk versus current cost of expenditures. So while you could say, arguably the average data breach costs, $4.8 million, and buying people devices that we have control over would be significantly less than that, it's only if you are breached, right? And we all know that you're inevitably going to be breached, but I think it's that continual perceived risk versus real cost, and real cost is always going to win out, unfortunately.
Was it Bruce Schneier said, people aren't really good at interpreting and understanding risk. We make all kinds of assumptions and get really fearful about some things that are low risk and blasé about things that are actually pretty high risk. I'm very blasé about going to the grocery store, but accidents happen close to home,
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing we tend to forget, and this is always a good reminder, because it is so thorough and it's grown over the years to be as substantial as it is. This is always done with humor and a little humility. And I think in cybersecurity, we tend to forget that risk is just a fact of life, and it is certainly a fact of business. We tend to see things in a little more, of a stark color contrast, perhaps, than the rest of the world. Businesses have been dealing with risk since before digital was a thing, right? For however long I don't even know when the first official business opened. Maybe it was somebody, selling their sheep to somebody else for no money, selling a sheep for a goat or whatever. But
you could probably go back to insurance, right? Like that was a big breaking point, like where businesses could really stand to lose a lot of money if a ship sank with tons and tons of goods in it. That's where the invention of insurance came. I think that I want to say that was the 16th century, something like that.
Right. But even before that, there are always these inherent risks in business, and business owners, people who run businesses, understand a lot of different types of risk. And we have a pretty narrow view of what risk is, and we tend to think of it as the biggest risk. And so reading this, you can look, and if you can get out of the cyber hat, you can start to see how these things fall into the grander scope of business. It's really easy to go down a rabbit hole here, and I usually chunk it out. I don't try to read it all at once because A, I'll forget it, and B, I just don't have 32 hours, nor do I want to spend 32 hours
time in one go.
I don't want to spend 32 hours in a row reading through this, so I'll chunk it out. And it's really good, I think, to look at it and say, all right, what's happening year to year? How does this impact business? How do other people see this? I don't know what percentage of non-security or IT people read this, but I think we'd get a really interesting response if we were to put this in front of people who don't do this every day of their lives, because risk is normal in business.
Mhm.
And this shouldn't
Yeah.
be like, dun, 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 we're super scared of everything. And I like how the DBIR team puts this in a way that makes it a little more human, so
Yeah.
that we can
The
maybe...
report's always aware of that, right?
Yeah.
That security isn't the most important thing to the business.
Right.
Or to most businesses.
Just to
say.
us.
Yeah. So just to give you a quick view of what it looks like when I go through this thing. This is how I go through it and absorb this kind of stuff. And if you know the band Avenge Sevenfold, there is an Avenge Sevenfold joke on this page. Some of their jokes get very niche and very specific.
Yeah, I noticed it's a third party and we'll breach if we want to. And then the footnote says you would cry too if it happens to you.
Yeah, that was great.
I'm like, oh, flashing back to my, stuff my parents listened to.
Cyndi Lauper. Or no, it was it's my, oh my gosh.
It's my party 50s, and I'd cry. Right? I'll cry if I want to.
She redid it.
Well, now you have to look it up.
Leslie Gore.
We can't continue until somebody
Leslie
answers.
Gore.
Yeah. Well, decades before Cyndi Lauper, right?
Yeah, I remember her redoing it, like a synth pop version of it. But
right. Oh, right. So
one of the interesting things when we were talking about devices. So I don't know how far you want to how far ahead you want me to jump into this thing, but
well, let me give just an overview first, and then I'll turn it over to you. So the cover of this thing refers to third-party risk management. The diagram that they kind of use throughout this thing, and they kind of call out third-party risk management as the key thing here. Whether you're talking about exploits in your third-party products or your partners just going down entirely because they were ransomware, and that was something critical that now stops your operations. But that was probably number one. They call that out. They say the most obvious and noteworthy among the overarching themes is the role that third-party relationships play in how and why breaches occur. And then exploits is the second one out of four that they call out. The third is stolen credentials and info stealers. And then the fourth is ransomware. And there is some other interesting stuff in there as well, but those are the big four. So over to you, Jackie.
Oh, so one of the things that I always complain about is, so one of the reasons I was talking about BYOD is because I feel like, well, and I'm unsure how to interpret the statistics. So one of the things that popped out to me early on is I was wondering about how people are using AI and what accounts they're using, because I had an absolute meltdown at one of my organizations about people using personal accounts. And they're like, well, don't worry. When we put the contact information spreadsheet in, we only asked it to summarize the ones that said yes. So it jumps in there, but it says 15% of, this is from page 13, that 15% of employees are routinely accessing Gen AI systems on their corporate devices. And I'm going to assume in this case, it usually means laptops. And I just as a wild guess, I would have guessed, what percentage of those people are using their personal accounts. It's over 70%.
72%. Yep.
Yeah. And it's just, and I always feel like such a curmudgeon and such a
That's me. I'm doing that. Doesn't surprise me at all.
I was
I am that person.
I was talking, I have a marketing friend who's looking for a new job, and they said that we were talking about this the other day, and they said they've been asked on every single one of their interviews which Gen AI tools they use. Not if, which.
Really? In interviews?
In interviews. Yeah. How are you going to accelerate the generation of content using Gen AI tools? How are you going to accelerate market research using Gen AI tools? Yeah. So it's not an option anymore. I mean, maybe for some of you guys in your roles, it's a little different, but certainly among my marketing colleagues and friends, this is not an option anymore. I use it every day. I have 2 to 3 open all the time. Again, I will iterate. I do not use it to write. I think it sucks at writing. Somebody who listens to this says, "No, it's good." Okay, great. Submit it to my grammar checker.
Well,
me.
Good for what, right?
But the writing is terrible.
It depends on the audience.
The writing is terrible. It has no personality.
If you're trying to boost your SEO, right?
Yeah.
If your page rank or whatever.
I guess.
It's not going to do any Pride and Prejudice, but
it is soulless. It has no personality, and it also fact checks things incorrectly or just doesn't bother. And also what I have found is when I'm looking up, we're going down a rabbit hole, so I'll bring it back around, I promise. When I'm using it for one topic and then I switch to another, it can't context switch. I've often asked it a question and had it.
You have to start a new chat session.
Like right? Totally misinterpret. So, but yeah, I don't think for certain jobs anymore, this is optional. And I think, we've been talking about AI security, LLM security, Gen AI security for a little bit now. We're still so far away from understanding the implications of it. And it's going to be a risk. But again, it's a business risk, and it's like BYOD, Jackie, that you brought up, because this is not an option. It is in businesses, whether it has benefit to you or me or the other person across the street. It's here to stay, and we got to figure it out, just like we did with mobile devices, just like we did with cloud, just like, everything else that came before it.
Yeah, I wonder if by, how many years it'll take until a part of this report is credentials or private information compromised through the compromise of a private ChatGPT account, right? So you pop somebody's personal ChatGPT account, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of crap they shouldn't have been putting in there in the first place. And, and that's also where credential stealing, right? So the credentials for sale on the internet are more likely to be your personal credentials, which isn't a huge deal because in the enterprise, you can enforce password complexity and all of that crap. But if ChatGPT are using your regular credentials and those are out there for sale, I think we're only starting to peel back the layers of how this stuff is going to go awry, which is exciting because it's job security for most of us.
So the question crossed my mind. Half these organizations say, no, you can't use generative AI. You can't do any of this. How many individuals are saying no and then have their side channel to use it themselves?
Yeah.
I would say 99%. That's totally unsubstantiated.
Yeah.
Don't throw your hat at me, Adrian. But I
agree. I agree. They're going to do it the way they're comfortable doing it. They're going to use their personal Canva account. They're going to use their personal ChatGPT. Absolutely.
Cursor's the really shit one.
Again, going back to my personal experience, I do copy edit for a lot of people, and I can sense it. I can see it in just a second. And I'll say, hey.
Yeah, but you're not your target audience. And I think that's so I've had to get really comfortable with this in the last couple months because with the amount of content I produce and have to put out. And I found that being more prescriptive about okay, this is the stuff that's okay and this is not. Because I'm the same way. I have a very specific voice when I write. I have very specific, my mom is a lawyer, so I was raised with an obnoxious grammar. But if they take a video that's a transcript of me talking and then they turn it into a blog post and it's 85% of the way there, I'm probably not my target audience. And I think it's you kind of have to be realistic about the fact that the way the bell curve works.
Well, sure.
If you're getting 82.5% of the bell curve, you're good.
Well, it does a much better job with that also.
Yeah,
Like if you're taking content that already exists and modifying it,
Yeah.
versus I think what you're talking about, Katie, is generating from scratch, right?
Like write me a white paper on identity and access management. That's probably
actually,
not
it's a
going to go
little
well.
both. But my point wasn't
okay.
even that. My point is that it's super easy for me, to spot, because that's what I do all day. So I don't want to say for everybody, but I do know other people who feel the same way I do. But then when you say, hey, are you using, people immediately say no. And I can tell that they're using it because
Yeah.
of formatting, because of patterns, all kinds of things. But then they tell me no. And I have to start
No
asking other
company can
questions.
honestly, yeah,
I'm not trying to
company
out them.
can say that they're not using it, right? Because they don't know if their employees are using it or not.
Right. And I'm not trying to out anybody. I'm just trying to understand context. So when I publish something, it is published accurately. But if people aren't being honest about it, how are they using it? On what system are they using it? Are they securing their data? What are they how much data are they putting into it? I work for an AppSec software company. There's some really sensitive stuff that people see. I'm not saying that the folks I work with do this, but I can 100% see a scenario where a researcher puts in a lot of sensitive data because they're less comfortable with writing. And this is proprietary data on customers. Again, not my company, not saying this is happening, has happened, but I can see 1,000%. And we know it's happening when it comes to software development, right? Vibing is this whole thing, right? You get these inaccuracies, you don't have checks, and now they're dumping them into repositories. You've got such massive implications. And it's not just the AI itself, it's the entire ecosystem of usage. And if people aren't being honest about it, that adds a whole other layer of problem on top of it from a management point of view. How are you going to secure something if you're spending half your time trying to figure out, hey, is somebody using it? How are they using it? What are they putting into it? How do we know it's secure? How do we know that they haven't leaked this? And it's a big problem because when I see people not being honest about it, and then I hear, companies being like, hey, which ones are you using? These things are at odds. The business goals and the personal usage and security are at odds in those scenarios. So I think we're going to have a big problem, and we're going to see a lot more of this coming up in the coming years because nobody is 100% like, oh yeah, this is great. This is wonderful. Not a problem. It's so far from that.
Adrian, I
So
think to your point, one of the next things they point out is, I think you had mentioned this, is third-party risk. So even if you're not using it, if you've got a contractor who has access to your data and they are using it, so there really is
right.
no, and I think I had predicted this in my 2025 predictions at the end of last year as well, this third party. So they say 30% of breaches at this point are including third parties, which is doubled from 15% last year. And I find that very easy to believe for a few reasons. I think when the economy becomes more shaky, you're more likely to use contract labor than direct employed labor. So third party risk goes up because of that. I think people are using more third-party service providers for AI projects and for security projects, and it's really interesting, not just from an AI risk standpoint, but from a security risk standpoint. I always think it's funny that a company can be FedRAMP or whatever the certification is. And it's like, yeah, that company, but if you've ever seen the vendor management process most of these companies have, it's not good. So they can have their data stuff in order, but the way they share data with third parties is often problematic at best.
Yeah, and I want to move away from AI here because honestly, there's not really anything tied in this report to any of these breaches related to AI. Most of the causes of these breaches and incidents just go back to most of the traditional stuff: stolen credentials, exploits, and ransomware. And even when you look at the third party breaches, most of those are due to ransomware because ransomware actors now know they have a higher chance of getting a payout if they disrupt operations. And if they're disrupting operations to somebody who manages someone else's operations, who has 1,000 customers who theirs, if they're doing payments or something like that, that they know their chances even better to get a ransomware payout. And I think I can't find the stat right now, but I want to say,
I'm looking at one page. It says one theory as to why the ransoms are decreasing is because fewer organizations are willing to pay the ransoms demanded. According to the data from our ransomware negotiation
less people are paying.
Contributors, 2022, approximately 50% of victims refused. In 2024, it increased to 64% of non-payers.
Yeah. The insurance companies won't pay anymore, so I think that's where a lot of payments were coming from.
And it disproportionately affects SMBs. So they said, and the way they define this is kind of weird. I think it's 1,000 employees, or maybe it's 2,000 employees and below. It's pretty generous when they say small businesses. The largest small business is pretty large, but they say 88% of SMB breaches were ransomware. So much bigger for smaller orgs who probably don't have any security teams or just using MSSPs, right?
Picking on the little fish.
If you've got a couple of thousand employees, your security team is going to be a handful.
3 people.
One hand.
One hand,
and they're responsible for everything. And having worn that hat, you never do any of those things really that well because you're just in juggling mode all the time.
Yeah.
So that doesn't surprise me versus somebody that's a huge enterprise, a big bank I worked at where they have a massive team of people who just sit there and hunt or just are constantly watching for stuff.
It doesn't exist for the vast majority of businesses, right?
Yeah. One of the things I found interesting in this, and I always look for some of this when I read any of these reports, is how things change over time. And what the attackers are people, they're moving where things are easier or where they find greater success. And so we put a lot of effort into an area, so that shores up. So then they move off to somewhere else. They talked about on what page was this? Crud. I lost the page number. They were talking about page 40, the exploitation, how exploitation has increased, exploitation of vulnerabilities and credential abuse has actually dropped. And if you look at the graphic over time, you see in 2022, we had this massive spike of credential abuse. It's trended down, and now we've had this reasonable spike in exploitation of vulnerabilities. So you can see how the adversaries are changing what they're doing over time in response to things. And you can see kind of that pull up over, as the time progresses or fade away.
Well, and to provide some insight into those exploits, like it's like a dozen exploits, right? It's just one of these. And there wasn't even an exploit with Snowflake. That was 165 victims, just from cred stuffing Snowflake accounts that didn't have MFA. Move it.
And
DMZ,
none of those trends changing means they're going to ignore, the attackers are going to ignore creds because we're in an off year.
It's just, where's the most low hanging fruit, right? If you notice that 2,000 people have a vulnerable MOVEit DMZ server, you're going to write a script to hack into all 2,000 of those. And then you're going to take it, you're going to put it into a spreadsheet, you're going to sort it by who makes the most revenue. And this is literally how they pick targets. They just says, okay, who has the money? Who has a cybersecurity insurance policy? How much is that policy for? Okay, we're going to target them.
Yeah, so they break it down into like 0-day exploits. Interesting edge devices and VPNs, which is not necessarily what I would have expected. Do you think this is happening because it's easier to automate those things?
Well, they're exposed to the public internet, so anybody can hit it.
So you come up with a vulnerability on one of these things.
Exploiting them?
You come up with a vulnerability or one's discovered. People are going to be slow to patch it because when you screw up the upgrade, you break all of the things all at once. So that's going to take some time. You can't do any endpoint security on it because nothing will install on it. And the security monitoring, it's probably kind of a black box. So if it doesn't tell you about it, you're not going to see it anyway as well. So it's a nice target.
I bet they've forgotten some of these devices exist. If I'm a retail company and every store has a Sonic wall in it or something like that, first of all, how much time is it going to take me to go and reconfigure everything? But, the easy takeaway here, so the VPN stuff is harder. That's on the internet on purpose. So employees can connect in, or maybe partners or something like that. But we have modern replacements for that. There's tons of ZTNA choices out there. You don't have to expose VPN to the public internet for people to connect into your network. But the other piece of it, if you've got your firewall management port on the public internet, why?
Oh man, yes.
Because that's a lot of these edge exploits. It's Fortinet, Palo Alto. Like every time you see one of these firewall network device vendors show up in the CISA Kev list, it's always the management port. It's almost always the management where you would log in to administrate the device, and that should not be open to the public internet.
And it's the part that all the documentation says, "Don't do this."
Yeah, exactly.
But it's easy, and it's probably enabled by default when you enable some, the management interface at all.
Maybe.
Or like the Saturday 5 p.m. CEOs going to a dinner with important people, and something needs to get flipped on quickly so somebody doesn't get pissed off, and then nobody remembers to go back in and fix it.
Yeah, urgency.
A lot. Yeah. It's like, well, and the VPN one was interesting too, because it grew from 3% to 22%. So whether that's, because a lot of organizations are moving away to alternative technologies, so the ones that are left are more vulnerable, I don't know, but it was an 8-fold increase. So
that could be one exploit. In the Move It DMZ case, Move It DMZ enabled over 700 breaches.
Yeah.
Just one exploit. If it's something that a bunch of people use and it's on the public internet, they're just going to write a script and just auto-exploit, auto-pwn everything.
Yep.
And there have been some widely deployed edge devices that have had some very public vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And numbers of them, 2 or 3 or 4 in a period of time. And they just get hammered.
Yeah. Well, that's something I want to make clear here is, just because you see the exploitation of vulnerabilities go up, there's something like 25,000, 30,000 vulnerabilities that are new vulnerabilities that are recorded every year, or at least get CVEs. And it is a vanishingly small subset of that you're seeing in this report that are doing all the damage.
Yeah. Somebody figures out how to exploit one at scale and all
exactly. Yeah.
Just one of the thoughts I had here that maybe to change that, talking about the data that I really appreciate Verizon doing. They're not just putting percentages in here and saying, X% of this or X% of that. They're telling you, like on every diagram, here's the data set. Here's the graph. Here's the trend or percentages. The data set is 4,630 or 20,271. There's a lot of reports that you find where they'll talk about trends, but they're going to kind of gloss over how many is the base number behind this. I find that to be really open about them to open up their data.
They're super transparent about that stuff. Like they'll tell you, look, part of the reason there's a spike here is we got a new data provider and got a bunch of new data in. And like it's not so much that the whole industry, this was a spike. Like there was a spike, but they'll tell you like a lot of the reason it's here is we now have better data for this,
and they're
this year compared to last year.
Careful about how they're classifying it.
Yeah.
Top action varieties, over 20,000 some odd actions. And you're like, somebody tagged all of that.
Yeah, that's the VERAS framework. If you've never looked at the VERAS framework, hundreds and hundreds of tags on things. It's huge.
It's really important that they do this, especially in an age where anybody can write anything and quote data out of context. If you're saying 98% of XYZ and your data set was 18 people,
people will still do it though.
They will still do it.
They'll read this and they'll misunderstand it and
but it's important, and that's why everybody looks forward to this report. And even like you said, if they got a new data provider, all of a sudden we went from I just happen to be looking at a stat right here, 1,700 incidents in 2024, but it was only 700 in 2023. You can at least compare and contrast and understand where that came from. But without that transparency, any data can be manipulated, and that's where the industry goes wrong. Not just our industry. I mean, frankly, every industry. But the transparency is really helpful in understanding what the problems are, where it doesn't make it easier to respond, but it at least shines a light on where the most likely problems are.
So I just wanted to highlight one other aspect here, something that jumped out of the even different parts of the report here, and that's speed. The amount of time it takes for attackers to do things and the amount of time it takes for defenders to do things. So they mentioned the median time to remediate leaked secrets in a GitHub repo was 94 days.
That one was crazy.
That was crazy.
Months the difference between, and months and months.
Yeah. When a CVE gets published, and then the time between that and when it goes on the CISA KEV list, which known exploited vulnerabilities list means there's active exploitation, 5 days or less for most of that. Difference between CVE publication and the edge CISA KEV stuff, the stuff that's exposed to the public internet, 0 days. That means we start seeing exploitation the same day that it's published, because that's the juicy low hanging fruit just sitting out there, first come, first served, right? So these threat actors are dropping everything.
With nation state actors, that shit is so easy to operationalize, right? Like they've got literal rooms full of dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and I'm sure there's a team that's literally just dedicated to monitoring new things, it's just, I think that's the thing is we're playing an asymmetric game, and that the opponent has. And the other thing is that even the non-nation state actors, they are more operationalized than most security teams are. They share information, they open source, and private security sector likes to patent things and charge for things and license things. And it's just, it's so hard to get ahead when your enemies are more flexible than you are.
Well, in particular, I mean, the criminal world, one of the things I found interesting working previous job is you look at the economy of the criminal world, ransomware being, the big elephant in the room. But you've got organizations, groups that are operating like a business. But all they're doing is sitting here focusing on how do I take this vulnerability and turn it into an exploit? Mm-hmm. And then turning around and they just sell access to it to whoever. I don't care who you are or anything like that. We'll give me, I don't know, whatever amount of Bitcoin it requires for this, and I'm a happy camper. And so, they're going to respond very fast. That's their whole business model.
And not to derail us on AI again, but the ability to take that exploit and get 90% of the way there with code with an AI tool. And then, it doesn't take days to write code for that exploit anymore. You can do it in minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. They can move faster. Yep. Well, that hit all the high points I wanted to hit. There's a lot of smaller things we could dive into. I urge people to take a look at this report. We could do another one of these segments next week, if we had one next week's RSA. So we do not have a show. We'll be doing interviews live from San Francisco next week. But anything else that you guys didn't get a chance to talk about before we wrap up this segment? That you saw in the report?
Godspeed at RSA. I wish everybody's Charlie horses and sore feet well.
Yeah, it is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Don't go to too many parties. Get sleep.
Yeah.
All right. So that's all we've got time for this week with the topic segment. Let us know if you like the topic segment, if there's other topics you'd like us to cover. I know that I've already got a couple on my list that I think would be great to cover. And make sure you check out this year's DBIR at verizon.com/DBIR. Very, very simple URL to go grab your copy. And see what you can find in there. And it's a good read. I'd urge people to actually read it. Don't shove it into some AI tool and have it summarize it. We'll be right back in a few. What was that, Jason?
I said you'll miss a lot if you do.
Yeah. You will. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.